severely. Lots of pain. 2 days he stayed over, which was just absolutely brilliant. It's the only thing I can do, to be honest.
That's it. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If we could come to order, please. Welcome to this special Cabinet meeting on the 1st of March 2022. Just before we start today's agenda, we're all aware of the acts that are unfolding in the Ukraine, which is the subject of a war being waged, an illegal war being waged by the state of Russia. This city and its people stand in solidarity with the people of the Ukraine, and the Library of Birmingham will be lit in the colours of the Ukraine flag throughout this week. There is an unlawful war being waged by Russia, and our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Ukraine and all they are suffering at the hands of the dictator Putin. I just wanted to put that on the record before we begin today's meeting. John.
Mayor, from the Liberal Democrat side, completely share those sentiments. It's an awful event unfolding in Ukraine, and we are, of course, a city of sanctuary. I'm sure we will welcome Ukrainians who come to this city.
Absolutely, we will. Yes, Ewan?
I just want to echo that as well. I think it was quite telling when I saw, I think it was a 20-year-old woman, I think they described her as, who was going through one of the border checkpoints, and she said her 23-year-old boyfriend was staying behind and was fighting in the streets of Kiev. And I think it just shows you how quickly this stuff gets real. I think on Tuesday night, they probably would have been planning things. There's a couple they'd been doing at the weekend. And I don't think toting a machine gun, trying to save his local district, is something they would have been planning. I think the bravery of the people they're displaying is amazing. And I think anything we can do legally to support them should be done, because I think that, if you don't stand up to evil dictators, and I think this is what we're seeing at the moment, where does it all end? So thank you for raising that, Ian.
Thank you both very much, because I do think that politicians in the West need to show the resolve that's going to be necessary if this act of aggression by Russia is ultimately to prove unsuccessful. So thank you, everyone. Item 1 on today's agenda then is the notice of recording and webcast. The meeting is being recorded and webcast on the Council's YouTube site, and members of the press public and indeed members of the council may record and take photos if you wish to do so. Item 2 is apologies. Are there any apologies? I've received one from Councillor Paulette Hamilton. Are there any others?
Councillor Walden is unable to make it today, so Councillor Bennett standing in his place.
Okay, welcome, Matt. If there are no others, then we'll note those 2 apologies. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Does anybody wish to declare an interest in respect of an agenda item on today's agenda? No. Exempt information then and possible exclusion of the press and public. We do have an exempt appendice in respect of report number 9 on today's agenda. Does anybody wish to raise anything on that exempt appendice?
I think everything we can say in public, but obviously should things go more detailed from that, we may ask for it, but we're not planning for anything to go private at this moment of time. It's the last item anyway, so.
Yes, that's right. Okay, thank you very much. We'll return to whether we have to agree a resolution or not in due course. Item 5 then is the private rented sector strategy. Shabrana.
This report is about the private rented strategy, which I'm presenting today to Cabinet to seek to ensure that we achieve long-term and sustainable improvements in the quality of private rented sector through engagement and regulations. The key priorities are to increase the supply of safe and secure accommodation by bringing back empty homes back to use and deliver of our empty home strategy. Identify and implement local initiatives to address local issues, tackle disrepair and criminality, prevent legal eviction and harassment, improve the energy efficiency in Birmingham homes, tackle fuel poverty and reduce carbon emissions, operate a high quality mandatory houses of multiple occupation licensing scheme, to seek the influence government of national regulations agencies to enhance relevant legislation and regulations. That's a tongue twister. The strategy will be further bolstered by funds to support specific interventions around tackling issues of housing, multiple occupation and etc. So I asked the Cabinet to approve the strategy in Appendix 1 of this report, and approval of the use of 191,000 for the new burdens grant allocation for 22-23, and extra staff for private rented sector team to deliver the strategy.
Thank you very much, Shabrana. As you say, yes, there are additional resources being deployed to carry out this strategy and 8 additional posts being created. Any questions or comments, John?
Thank you. I certainly welcome the extension of the activity in this area. I just wanted to ask a question, really, because particularly as there are more environmental health officers being employed, one of the big issues with private rental properties when tenants are put in without bins and without any information from the landlord as to when their bin collection day is. Similarly, you get complaints from neighbours when gardens aren't maintained and overgrown, get infested with rats. Will those officers be able to intervene in areas such as that?
Thank you. We'll come back to you in a second. Matt.
Yes, so it's just a query. It's about priority 2, which talks about focusing resources in those areas where housing conditions are at their worst and where the greatest benefits can be achieved, which obviously sounds sensible and I don't have a problem with that in principle. It's just a concern that we don't end up neglecting areas where there's a comparatively small number of houses in the private rented sector, Frankly Great Park, Kings Norton South, Shard End, where, for those people who there's a problem, it's still a problem. And I hope that we don't end up in a situation where we're just focusing resources purely in the areas where there's high numbers, disregarding rogue landlords who operate in other areas of the city where the density isn't quite so high.
I think the extra staffing actually will ensure that we can apply this city-wide. Shabrana, do you want to respond?
On your comment, Matt, this is a Birmingham city-wide, so it's not just certain areas that it will cover everything. On the bin collection services, I'm assuming they will. Sujina, do you want to just comment on that, or Rob?
Yeah, we'll bring Rob in, but I'm just before you comment, Rob. I am interpreting the environmental health team being able to action non-compliance with housing legislation will mean that things can be done if people do not properly maintain their property, and indeed if they start using outdoor garden areas inappropriately.
Absolutely, and that is correct. And I just wanted to add that the following report on today's agenda relates to selective licensing schemes. Colleagues will see that on that report, additional powers within the selective licensing scheme will help us manage those private rented sector properties that will be licensed within the scheme.
Thank you. If there's no further comments then, can we agree recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll now move on then to item 6, which is the proposed selective licensing scheme that the previous item has now enabled. Shabrana.
Right, back to me. Right, thank you. This report seeks delivery of selective license scheme in Birmingham. Legally, a local authority can only license mandatory HMOs for 5 people or more, unless it introduces selective license schemes covering all PRS properties, or an additional license schemes covering just the smaller HMOs. The proposed selective license schemes will cover 25 wards in Birmingham, and the private renter sector is above 25% or have high levels of deprivation and crime. The aim of this is to improve the standards within properties and the management of them. The license will enable the council to ensure that appropriate conditions are practiced in the appropriate way, including landlords to work with council to tackle antisocial behaviour, any rise in property from their properties, and landlords to undergo free training course to be aware of their responsibilities. The selective licence will ensure that we have the powers to proactively identify private rented properties and join up with other services such as and tackle antisocial behaviour. Improving standards will hopefully lead to a more sustainable community, living better accommodation that improves all tenants to achieve their potential, especially in children. A consultation was carried out, including legally elected members, focus groups, supplier drop, 125,000 properties in the 25 wards. The responses were 839 were made for the consultation, about 50% of the landlords and 50% of the tenants. Residents were mostly supportive while the landlords were mostly not. The increasing feedback from the consultation included requests from significant members of people from the inclusion of their wards of areas in selective license schemes. Due to the size of the proposed selective license scheme, we are required to submit an application to the government for approval. If approved, it would be the largest scheme in the UK, covering between 40,000 and 50,000 properties. Officers have been regularly discussing with Duluck and in preparation of submitting the application. The consultation has not indicated any issues that would prevent Birmingham City Council from proceeding with any submissions of the application to the government, and we therefore are seeking of approval. The plan is to start the scheme commencing 1st of April 2023. So Cabinet is asked to approve section 2.1 and 2.3 of this report.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions on this, Matt?
Yes, I mean, obviously we welcome this as far as it goes because our group's been calling for this for quite some time. The issue for us really is that it doesn't go far enough. We've got a scheme that where only 2 of the 6 possible criteria for selective licensing have been considered: crime and deprivation. If you compare other cities like Liverpool, they've got a scheme that covers more than 80% of the city. They focus on property conditions. We haven't been able to do that because the stock condition survey that was proposed that set out in the business plan for 2018 to 22 hasn't been carried out. Rents have got a scheme that factors in the impact of ASB. We haven't done that. So as a result, what's likely to happen is that the problem's going to move around the city to areas where the scheme won't be in place. So areas like Pipe Hayes or parts of Harborne, Perry Common, King's Standing, Erdington, Castle Vale, they'll miss out and the problems will get worse in those areas. So I just think there's a missed opportunity here. We could have done a larger scheme that covered a larger part of the city, and therefore it prevents the problem simply being moved on to other areas.
John?
Thank you. And I was actually surprised this report came to this Cabinet today because of the Burda rules that we were given last week. But there you are. I'm certainly in favour of and support the selective licensing going ahead. And as Councillor Bennett has indicated, I too am concerned about the fact the council was a little bit unambitious in terms of the number of wards and the criteria that we used for selecting wards, because the private rental sector is quite dense in many wards of the city. And these powers, as we heard in the previous item, are potentially very, very powerful and very useful in sorting out issues when they arise. The report does refer to potential for expanding the scheme, and there's reference particularly to moving to an additional licensing scheme that I think, as I read it, would be potentially citywide. So perhaps we could hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I think as it's set out in the report, the intention is to gather data for to identify whether we could have a citywide additional licensing scheme. That would cover only smaller HMOs, whereas this scheme covers all HMOs. So I think the issue for us is getting the agreement of government that we can deploy this, which I think actually relates back to some of the comments that you have made, Matt, about the data that's been used in comparing us with elsewhere. We'd like to get into a position, I think, where we could deploy a scheme across more areas of the city, but I think we need to make sure that we're confident in the data we are presenting to government in order to achieve that. John?
No.
Oh, I thought you wanted to comment. Siobhan?
Can I just ask Sir Julie just to sort of explain the whole process, how we actually did the 25 wards, and what we focused on, just the PRS 20% and crime. That's it.
Why we've used crime and deprivation.
Yes.
Sajila,
Hello,
did you hear all of that?
I did. Thank you, Leader. Yes, to pursue a selective licensing scheme, there are 6 different criteria that we can use that members have quite rightly pointed out. And we need the evidence to establish which criteria we want to use. So initially, we looked at all 6 criteria, and the evidence that we could provide, the data that we could provide with all confidence in Birmingham related to crime and deprivation. And that's why we have pursued those 2 evidential bases. However, whatever the evidential base we used doesn't change how you deliver the selective licensing scheme. So even if we had evidential evidence of antisocial behaviour or of stock condition, that wouldn't have changed the actual delivery of the selective licensing scheme. So we can still cover all of those issues within the selective licensing scheme that we are proposing, and we can have all of the benefits relating to all of the criteria that we've already that are considered within a selective licensing scheme. So I want to reassure members that the evidence base that we've chosen puts us in the best position for success when making our case to DLUC, and it will still maintain the same benefits as if we'd chosen another evidence base.
Thanks, Julia. I think Matt was coming from a slightly different angle. Matt?
Yes, so we may have the same benefits, but presumably not across the whole city, or at least not in as much as large an area of the city as we might otherwise. The stock condition survey concerns me that we haven't done it. It's in the business plan for 2018 to 22, and it hasn't been done. I know you're probably going to say COVID, but COVID began in 2020. So there were a good 2 years before that where we could have made some progress on that. And as a result, that is evidence we can't use and presumably could have used to widen the area somewhat that could be part of this scheme.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Let me just deal with that comment about COVID, though. OK, something could have been done in the 2 years between 18 and 20. However, we could not have foretold that we were going to be hit with a pandemic in 2020. So in that 4-year programme of things that we were intending to do, not everything could have been done in the first 2 years. So, Gila, on the point about the additional criteria leading to a wider area of coverage, is that correct?
Given we don't have the evidence at hand at the moment, so we don't know whether it would have or it wouldn't have had made a difference to the 25 wards. But what I would say is, in our discussions with DLUC have been very clear that should we seek in the future to put in another selective licensing scheme application that covered more area, then they'd be more than willing to look at such an application. Also, we've if you like, we've made ourselves more resilient by looking now at the evidence for an additional licensing scheme, which I hope will reflect then back on the consultation about people who wanted more wards included. So although we might not be able to pursue selective licensing across the whole of the city, we will still be able to have a look at whether additional licensing could benefit other areas that are not included within selective licensing. I will also just add that in general, DLUC do not support applications that cover whole cities or very, very large percentages of the city. And given the fact that we're already going to be putting in an application for potentially the largest selective licensing scheme in the country, I think that by choosing these specific 25 wards, we've taken an appropriate way of pursuing our desires.
Thanks, Julia. John?
Thank you, Leader. I've always found it very surprising that if I want to run a pub and sell you alcohol, I need to have a licence personally and on premises. If I want to rent you a home, I need to have a house to rent to you. I absolutely support this. On a note, I'm Councillor for Acox being one of the wards covered by this. It was also mentioned about Liverpool and why we aren't covering a wider scheme. Liverpool had a very, very successful city-wide scheme for about 5 years, and they resubmitted an application to the government for the same city-wide scheme, and that was turned down. I would personally have preferred to see a city-wide scheme, I think, which would be licensing all private residential properties, but that is not something we're likely to achieve the evidence base that we currently have. And I think what we are proposing here is a scheme that I hope the government will accept. I hope that all parties in the council will support this application, and we can move forward on that basis and try to protect some of our poorest and most deprived residents.
Thank you. Shabrana, do you want to add anything?
Like, we've also got the strategy for PRS as well, so these two will tie in together citywide.
Thank you very much. Can we agree then recommendations 2.1 through to 2.3? All agreed? Thank you. Item 7 then is the extension of King's Norton Cemetery. John.
Thanks. Leader. This is the first of two reports I'm bringing to expand capacity within our bereavement services, cemeteries and crematoria. This report seeks to extend capacity at King's Norton Cemetery. It's a rather sad reflection of the human cost of the last 2 years of the pandemic that we're having to bring forward proposals to expand at this point. It's a local report. Before April 2020, that cemetery was handling an average of 219 burials a year. From April 2020, that's gone up to in excess of 525 a year. The effect of that means that there's now only 2 years left of burial capacity within non-Muslim areas and no capacity for Muslim burials within the Muslim burial section. Before the pandemic, we thought we got 5 years supply left before we need to step forward with further expansion. This provides additional capacity for burial, and also proposals. The proposals include the installation of a land drainage scheme and the laying out of the burial grounds as well. The work will proceed as soon as possible and will be completed in the course of 2022-23. And we're also looking to bring forward proposals for phase 5 of the cemetery extension in due course. This will help us to address the pressures that we see around provision for Muslim burial within the city. We've also got a section that's due soon to open up within Quinton. Of course, we have capacity at Sutton New Hall as well. So with that, Leader, I propose this to Cabinet.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions on this? No, not seeing any. So can we agree the recommendations 2.1 through to 2.4? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And then item 8, refurbishment of Yardley Crematorium. John.
Yeah, so the second piece of investment into our cemeteries and crematoria. So this sets out the proposals for the renewal of the facilities at Yardley Crematorium. Obviously, crematorium require regular maintenance and investment, and every 20 years there's a need to rebuild the facility and replace the burning chambers. The current facility has 3 chambers, but with the advancement in technology, the new facility will have 2, and also improved gas emission treatments, which will reduce emissions as well. We did look at alternatives, including electric cremators and resumation, which is water-based cremation. The alternatives aren't sufficiently advanced at the moment to know the true cost of the introduction, but we'll continue to look at those as we renew the wider provision of crematoria within the city. This will require closure works at the site while the work's underway, but there is capacity at Lodge Hill to take up any potential displacements. There will be some income losses as a result of that, but the reduction in costs to using 2 rather than 3 chambers will offset some of that. We're looking to commence the works again as soon as possible. The closure is likely to be late spring, early summer. That's the favoured time for closure, and we've done that in consultation with our funeral director colleagues. So with that, Leader, again, I propose that to Cabinet.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on this? No. In which case then, can we agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.4? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Which takes us to item 9, the contract award for provision of repairs and maintenance, gas servicing and capital improvements 2022 through to 24. This is a report that was not on the forward plan. So there is a covering note explaining the urgency of this decision, which in short is a procurement legal challenge resulting in alternative contract arrangements having to be put in place, and they need to be put in place by the 1st of April, hence the urgency. Shabrona.
This report also provides details of the contract extension between provision of its responsive repairs and maintenance service, gas services and capital improvement work for the council housing stock in all areas of Birmingham from 1st of April 2022 to on the 16th of March, Cabinet authorised Managing Director of City Health in conjunction with the Assistant Director of Development and Commercial, the Chief Finance Officer and the City Solicitor and Monitoring Officer to take up the contract option to extend 2 years, subject to satisfactory performance and commercial terms, and not to extend and procure any contracts necessary. Cabinet are asked to agree the following recommendations. 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you, Siobhan. Ewan.
Excuse me. Thanks very much, Ian. You may want to make reference to the City Solicitor here, but I'll leave that to you, so you're chairing the meeting. I wrote to City Solicitor last week because I had some issues with some of the items that were put in the private report, as you probably expect me to have. As it says, excuse me, as it says, the report contains commercially and reputationally sensitive information, but having read the report, I didn't really see anything in it that prejudiced the commercial and financial interests of the council. So I wrote to the city solicitor. I won't sort of read out the whole letter, but there's two sides of it explaining why I thought some of those items should not be in private. The reply from the city solicitor sort of surprised me somewhat, because he didn't actually pick up any of the points that I raised. It was more that there was reference to legal prejudice. Obviously, you didn't want to give out your legal advice. So on that basis, that he's only saying there's legal advice in here, not any of the points that I've made. What I would then ask would be that the public report would be updated to say that if the legal, so obviously the legal advice stays private, but the reputationally damaging stuff to the council, that can be released now, because obviously in the email I received from city solicitor, he hasn't disputed anything that I've said. It's just talks about the legal advice. And obviously, as I go into detail in my letter to the city solicitor, obviously there is public interest as well, and the council can't use private reports just to hide stuff that it finds embarrassing. You know, you'd accept that yourself. I would think yours open to challenge. You know,
I would accept that. I've not seen the letter that you've written to the city solicitor. What I would suggest is that you take up the points you are raising in this meeting today with the city solicitor. We have a public report that is in front of us. There's a exempt appendice attached to it, and we will make a decision based upon the two reports that are in front of us.
I'm obviously, before I say my next bit, I obviously have to make clear that I'm not a solicitor, but obviously there is reference in the report for etc. And obviously, if there's items in the report that should be made public and they weren't made public, that in itself could be subject to legal challenge. Now, I'm not going to go into the bit that's in the private section of the report, but I would it's certainly worth hearing from the city solicitor, I would have thought. Do you not think?
Well, this is a correspondence, a private correspondence between you and the city solicitor. I think that you need to take up the matters with him rather than trying to do it through this meeting.
Well, I mean, I could read the letter out if that would be helpful to you.
No, that would not be helpful. John, let me bring you in.
Thank you. I'm trying to stick to broad issues here, because it seems to be another situation where contracts have run out and they've had to be extended for a couple of years, and the extension process has proved fairly difficult and messy, according to this public report. I wanted to be clear: is the proposal to recontract after the 2-year period, and if so, will the work get underway on that so it is done in a timely fashion when the 2 years expires of this extension?
That is my understanding. Yes, that the intention is that we will reprocure this after the 2 years that are set out in this report.
Recontract rather than reprocure.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We're looking at options, we're starting that process now, so that we can, from 2024, ensure that we've actually mobilised either, different contracts or different arrangements. But those options are actually being explored at the moment, and will come forward to Cabinet during this next few months.
Thank you. Apologies, I didn't see yourself there. Okay, Ewan?
Yeah, I'll do the public bit now. Now we've had our discussion. Yeah, I mean, just want to echo the points and probably expand upon the points that John made there. I mean, obviously, this contract was supposed to run between the 1st of April 2016 and the 31st of March 2020. It was extended to the 31st of March 2022. And here we are again now. We're looking to extend the contract to the 31st of March 2024. So, I mean, 2016 was the last time this contract went out to public tender. We're looking here at pretty much by the end of this contract, it'll almost be a decade before we'll have been back out to the market on this. And I think, all the way through this, we've been saying things about procurement and running out of time and contracts being extended, ending up in a single contract negotiation, etc. And that may not be the case here, but in terms of single contract negotiation, but it's all about getting the best value for the council. At last meeting, which I appreciate you didn't chair that one in, the HRA came to the last cabinet meeting, and it spoke of the procurement going through to 2024 already, which suggested an element of predetermination, because that report was talking about a decision being made that hadn't actually been made, because we're making it here today, which that wasn't made clear at the time. And I think one thing I said at that last meeting, when discussing the HRA, that the procurement, this type of procurement, really needs to go to ONS, not to just look at the decision, but to look at how the council goes around making these decisions. Now, Bridget's answer at the time was that as an administration, you know, you're not the ones who make the decisions what scrutiny do, but you work closely with scrutiny chairs, etc. After May, there may be another administration making the decisions, but I certainly feel that there could be cross-party agreement here that whatever happens with this decision here today, that scrutiny should look at not only at the resulting, but how we go about placing these contracts. And the final bit I was going to mention was that risk management is obviously something that were regularly raised. In March 2021, the report said risks would be monitored and identified, and I would say from reading this report, and they clearly haven't been. Thank you very much.
Well, let me just pick up the point about scrutiny. I'm more than happy to have a conversation, should I be the correct person to have that conversation, with the relevant chair of ONS following the May elections about this issue. Tristan.
Just specifically on that point, there is a resources overview and scrutiny task and finish group that is working at this very time around procurement process, and that is due to report soon. So I'm sure the Conservative members have been actively engaged in that process, and the recommendations from that obviously will come to me as cabinet member. And then
I think that's a fair point, and I don't think anyone in this cabinet would dispute that procurement could be better. I just think this is such an important situation, and of course we're dancing around it a bit because there's an awful lot in this here that's in private that we can't discuss. But I would just say this is such a big thing. It affects so many individuals, often the most vulnerable in the city. I think we all have it where we have people getting in contact with us regarding repairs to be carried out, people who are saying they haven't had a shower for a certain length of time because someone's come to have a look at something and the repair hasn't been carried out. And I would just say that for the residents of the city, is this special to concentrate on this for them just to have a look at it, just for the residents. I don't see why it can't be a cross-party thing. I don't.
Well, as I've already said,
yeah,
I don't disagree with you. Julie, is there anything you want to add?
Just to give an overview really of the contracting process. So in 2016, the contract was let on a 4+2+2 basis. So after the first initial 4 years, then there was the break clauses where we negotiate performance and commercial terms or look to be procured. And the option that was taken up in March this year was that we would look to negotiate commercial terms for the north, east and west and look to re-procure the south of the city. As the actual report states, that we were unsuccessful in reaching those terms for the east and west, and therefore we've taken on an alternative route to ensure that we get value for money and excellent performance from our tenants. And then the south of the city, the information is contained in the direct report, why we have advocated for that. But what I would like to reassure Cabinet is that we are in the process now of looking at 2024, with looking at a longer term arrangements and making sure that we get a really good value for money for our tenants, and it's aligned to the Housing Revenue Account business plan and capital investment works that we need to absolutely accelerate. So I just want to say that background work is starting to be done. We've got a range of options that we've been looking at, and the report will be coming to Cabinet in the summer about those options.
Thank you very much. Shabrana, do you wish to add anything? Okay, we have 3 recommendations in front of us, number 2.1 through to 2.3. I should just read out 2.3 so we're all clear on the decision that we're taking. 2.3 reads to approve options considered and recommended proposal as set out in section 3 of the exempt appendix. Can we agree those 3 recommendations?
Great.
Thank you very much. Which takes us to other urgent business. Does anybody have any other urgent business they wish to raise? No? In which case, thank you all very much.